Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today, what we're going to talk about is the Elektron Analog Heat+HowFX, this little beauty right here. Just first of all, disclaimer, Elektron did send this over, but they don't have any say over this video or anything that goes into it. They don't see it beforehand, no money exchanged hands or anything. They just wanted to know what I thought as a performer and producer and somebody who uses a lot of their gear. And I've reviewed plenty of their stuff on this channel and done a lot of tutorials about their stuff. Obviously, I'm a big fan of what they do, and they were curious as a user what I thought of the Analog Heat+HowFX. As you all know, I'm an Elektron fan. I use a lot of their gear. But that said, I think that Elektron made a huge mistake with the Analog Heat+HowFX, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. First, let's talk about what it is. It is the Analog Heat Mark III that we all wanted, which was all of the great, beautiful things about the sound and the warmth and the power of the Analog Heat, plus a compressor. For years, we've all been asking for that as kind of the amazing master end of chain piece of kit, and they did that. They added in a compressor, and they also added in a great bass mono function, which allows you to pick a frequency and then mono everything below that frequency, which is another great end of chain effect. All of these things add together when you're using this as an end of chain for live performance to help kind of make your live performance sound more mastered, since you're not playing mastered tracks as a DJ would. So it's important to have something or things at the end that can help make those tracks sound more finished and more complete, bring them up to the same kind of level of power as what you would get out of a master track, or similar at least. The second thing the Analog Heat+HowFX is an analog effects suite. It's actually pretty slick the way this works. It sounds really great as well. You can actually combine a bunch of different effects into what they call a flow, which if you're familiar with guitar pedal boards, it's very much like having a whole bunch of pedals that are kind of set up in sequence so that you can run a signal through them, switch them on and off, and decide which ones you want to use in that signal flow. The cool thing about the Analog Heat+HowFX is that you can not only select individual effects, but if you do select an effect, you can then move it around. So you can change your pedal board. So if you look, you can move where this effect is and then leave it there. And then you can select another one and you can move that one and leave it there. So what's really interesting about that is it's very much like a pedal board, except that during a performance, you can actually change up the order of your pedal board without having to rewire anything. Normally, it's an audio signal that's flowing from pedal to pedal. In this case, it's flowing through these virtual effects, these virtual pedals, and you can move them around, which dramatically changes your sound. So if you want to run a delay into a reverb versus a reverb into a delay, that's going to sound very different. If you want to do some bit reduction at the beginning and then have that go through different effects, or if you want to wait till the very end and do some bit reduction, that's going to sound very different. You can also move around the heat portion and the compressor portion. So if you want to put that heat at the end of your chain to kind of add some saturation and warm things up a bit, or if you want to put it at the beginning and really use it as a distortion and overdrive things and then run those through the rest of the effects, you can do that. What's also really amazing about the Analog Heat+HowFX that makes it a really cool machine is that once you set up a pedal board of, the pedals the way you like it and the different effects and the chain going the order that you want it to go, and you set those parameters of each one of those effects the way you like it, you can then save that as a preset. And then during your performance, you can recall different presets. So you could basically have a preset per track if you wanted your effects chain to be completely different from one track to the next. You could even have a different effects chain by sections of your track that you're playing live. And so that way you can actually have it do different things in the break than it's doing in the build-ups of your song, for example. So really flexible, and it makes it a really compelling effects suite. All of those parameters that you can save can also be manipulated via MIDI CC. So if you want to use an external controller, or if you wanted to sequence the effects or things like that, you can do that with external machinery, which is also pretty cool. It has MIDI in, out, and through, so you can control it using other MIDI controllers as well. Again, adding to the flexibility of those different sets of parameters that you can use. Now let's talk for a minute about what the Analog Heat+FX isn't. It isn't just an end of chain, which a lot of people, myself included, use the Analog Heat MK2, and we would use that as just as our end of chain. We would have a setup that we liked in there, and we would just set it and forget it. This isn't just that anymore. That's what it was for a lot of us. Obviously, it could do a lot more, but that's what a lot of people used it for. This isn't just that. This is a full-blown effects suite plus a lot of great sound shaping abilities, and as well as the ability to be an end of chain if that's what you want it to do. And another thing that it isn't cheap. But that's something that we're going to talk about later when we talk about the mistakes that Elektron made with this box. I think that I have a different kind of perspective on what I think they should have done versus what they did do. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. So who is the Analog Heat+FX for? It is for performers and producers that need to have a lot of really detailed control over the sound shaping of their synths or their inputs. I mean, it could be all kinds of different inputs, but being able to really have detailed control over everything from compression and saturation to reverb and delays and bit reduction and tape warble and different things like that. So being able to really shape sounds in a really, really detailed way. It's also for anyone who has vintage synths or maybe some really basic synths and they want to give them a new twist, a more modern twist. I spent a bunch of time running my vintage SH-101 through the Analog Heat+FX and got lost for hours in it, because even though the SH-101 is a relatively simple, although great sounding synthesizer, it doesn't have any internal effects. So being able to run it through this and get everything from, bit reduced and tape warble kind of lo-fi sounds all the way to, really precise delays and great sounding reverbs and washes and all kinds of stuff. So it really allows to be able to take an old synth and give it a new twist. And I'm going to do another video about that coming up pretty soon. But it's a great use for this, as well as all the things that we've talked about already. The Analog Heat+FX is also for producers and performers who want to develop custom chains of effects and save them as presets to be able to be recalled later. So let's say you were using this as a piece of studio equipment and you were using it via Overbridge and you had it in your DAW of choice and you were sending to this as an effect. You could have preset effects. So let's say you wanted to have a vocal chain, and you could have that set up within here and have a whole bunch of effects as a vocal chain that you could send from your DAW through this and then back into your DAW. Or if you wanted to have it set up, as I mentioned before, where it's doing different effects for different tracks as you're playing live, or if you wanted to have it set up with a different preset for individual synths. Let's say a certain synth needs a certain amount of low pass filter, or needs a certain amount of saturation or anything like that to help enhance the sound of it just as a baseline. You could have a preset per synth. So if you have multiple synths, all you have to do is recall that preset when you're running it through the Analog Heat+FX. In the end, the Analog Heat+FX is for a lot of people. And I think that's kind of the point of this box. Most Elektron users who are already Elektron users are going to buy more or less everything that Elektron puts out, unless it's something that they're really not going to use. Everything that they can get their hands on, they're going to try to get their hands on. But with the Analog Heat+FX, this isn't just for them. Although it is for people like me who love to use Elektron gear, it's also for a new group of people who aren't using Elektron gear and probably wouldn't use other Elektron gear. Maybe they're vintage synth enthusiasts. Maybe they're live keyboard performers. Maybe they're a guitarist. Maybe they're a vocalist who wants to use these effects. What this box does is it really expands the potential customer base for Elektron, which is a really good business move. And it kind of goes along with what they did recently, where they made it possible for Overbridge to integrate with Pro Tools. And I think that again was to open up to a whole new group of users beyond, live techno hardware performers, and get out to professional audio, professional studios, stage performers, things like that. And I think the Analog Heat+FX is another step in that direction for Elektron. And I think it's a really good business decision. Although, as I mentioned before, it could have been even better business decision, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So who's this box not for? This is really not for somebody who's just getting started in production or performance. It does take quite a bit of understanding and to kind of harness the power of this and get the most out of it. And it's not just a magic box that you plug it in and it makes everything sound great. You do have to dial it in, and there's a lot of control over that, which for people that have a bit more experience, that's great and you're gonna love it. But if you're just starting out, this may not be for you, because you may get frustrated by it, or you may not get the kind of sound out of it that others may be getting out of it, and that may be frustrating. So what are the positives and negatives? The positives, obviously the number one positive of this thing is the sound. Just like with the Analog Heat, I was skeptical and didn't get an Analog Heat right away, because I said, that's a lot of money to spend on something that kind of just does one thing for me. And then as soon as I plugged it in, I realized what everybody was talking about. I heard the sound of my gear, my live setup going through that, and what adding those things that I put into my preset really did to the sound. The Analog Heat+FX takes that to the next level, because you still have all that same great Analog Heat sound, plus adding a compressor, adding that bass mono function, and then adding in all of the great ability to add these kind of color effects as well. So the sound is really, really good. Obviously, the other things that are good about it are things that you have come to expect from Elektron. So the build quality is super solid. The knobs feel really great. The screen is bright. You can see it. All of those things that you kind of come to expect from Elektron. The interface, this has a new interface, and it's kind of a bit more like the interface on the Syntact, where they're going a bit more graphic, which I think is cool for people that are new, so you can really see what's going on rather than just having numbers and values. So I like it. It doesn't get in the way, and I think that it does look very logical. It does go with exactly what the sounds are, and I think some of the animations are really, really clever. The way they've represented sounds visually and made it easier to dial things in just by looking at it. And of course, the other big thing that's really a positive about this is being able to save things as presets and recall those in real time. So during a performance, or when you plug in a new synth or whatever, you don't have to dial everything back in again. And you have a lot of flexibility. As with everything with Elektron, you get a lot of flexibility to customize each individual thing and then save that. And then you can save all of those customizations to one place. And now what about the negatives? Well, one of the biggest negatives I've found is that it's got a couple of different inputs, but those inputs can't be routed separately. So you have one chain that you're going through. You can't, like with the Eventide H90, you can process two separate incoming signals at once. It would be great if this could do that as well. Especially for something that I think is part of their big mistake that they made, which is not being able really to separate out the end of chain with the effects piece. But we'll talk about that more in a sec. But as far as being able to route those, being able to route the input separately, I would love to be able to have in my live setup, have my modular coming into one input and running that through the color effects, the sound shaping effects, and then have that go back out into my mixer, and then have my master out coming into a separate channel into the Analog Heat+FX, and have that just go through those end of chain pieces. So just the saturation filter, that ending EQ, the compressor, and that the bass mono function. That would be much more useful for me personally, the way I have my setup run, to be able to use it as two separate things. So that brings us to Elektron's big mistake that they made with this. I think their big mistake is that they combined two machines into one machine. Which is a bit ironic because Elektron gets criticized often for leaving functionality out of a machine and forcing you to buy another machine, which, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's a popular criticism of Elektron machines. With this, they kind of did the opposite. They put things in the same machine that could have very easily been, logically, two separate machines. And I think a lot of people, myself included, would have bought both of them instead of just buying one machine. At the same time, being able to do that would have made each one of them more flexible and more usable, because they could have been used at different places in your audio chain. Now, imagine if you had, instead of a box this size, if you had a half-sized two boxes next to each other that add up to this size. One of which is an Analog Heat Mark III with all those great heat things plus the compressor and the bass mono. And the other one is the Analog FX, which is this pedal board customizable multi-effects unit that could be, customized and used at any point in your chain, and then have the other part be the end of chain. I think something like that would have stood up right next to, or ahead of, even in some cases, things like the Eventide H9 or H90. Even though the effects are different, obviously it's not a harmonizer, but having the ability to do multiple effects, change around the position of those effects, which other multi-effects processors do, but then being able to save those in very easy to recall presets so that you can bring those up anytime during a show and have this act like a synth voice, like something new that you would bring in to change a whole section of a show. That Analog effects unit would be very popular on its own. And, an H9 is $399, I think, and I think the H9 is max is $599, and then the H90 is like $899 already, which this is just $999 by itself. And then if you've got, if you were to have something like an H90 and an auto boom, you would have basically something similar to this, but it would cost you about $1,300, where this is selling right now for $999. So I think a big mistake is they could have made more money off of this by selling it as two separate machines. I think that many of us would have paid the same $899 that we paid for the Analog Heat Mark II, or even $100 more, if it had that compressor included in it and the bass mono function included in it just by itself. And then that other one could have been a totally separate box. Now, they didn't do that, which, whatever, their mistake. They probably could have made more money off of us. But because they didn't do it, now what I would like to see, and my suggestion to them would be to find a way to route those inputs so that you could functionally do the same thing that you would do with two separate machines, if that's the way you want to use it. So for people like me that want to use this in a live performance setup, I would love to be able to, like I said, route voices through effects, and then route a master through the end of chain part of this, and have it run two separate effects chains, and have those two different inputs routing to those two separate effects chains. That would be really useful for me, and I think a lot of people that are using this gear the same way that I am. All right, so final thoughts on the Analog Heat+FX. It sounds great. It's a great sounding machine. It's a creativity machine. You can really sound shape with it, which is amazing, and it sounds really great, whether you're using Elektron gear or not, which is kind of a new step out for Elektron. It's not just limited to being part of their ecosystem. This really works for a lot of different types of musicians. So I think it's great for that. It's very much a Swiss Army knife piece of machinery, a piece of kit, kind of like the Octatrack. It can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. So if you want it to be a live performance end of chain, great. If you want it to be a, reverb on a send using overbridge from your DAW of choice, great. If you want to set presets for different instruments, whether it be a guitar, a vocal, a synth, whatever you want, then it can be used that way. But very much like the Octatrack, it's not really set up to use all of those things at once. It can use individual things. You have to decide what you want it to be and have it be that in that situation. And then in your next situation, it can be something totally different. But it doesn't very easily do all of those things all at once in any one situation. I think it could have, and in my mind, it should have been two separate machines. I think Elektron would have made a lot more money that way, and I think it would have been more usable for people who are using it like me, and more flexible if somebody wanted just one or just the other, or then both. It could have been used in a lot more flexible ways, and in a way that would have been more profitable for Elektron in the end. But at the end of the day, it's all about the sound and the creativity and how it works making music. And I would say both of those get an A with this for sure. The sound is great, and the creativity, the interface, the ability to make, really clever changes and modifications and control it in different ways. Really, really well done and really well implemented. And I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of people for a long time. The sounds that you can get out of this using other synths and other machines are amazing. This video wasn't about that. I'll do some other videos down the line about how this sounds and how it works into my rig. If you do want to see some great examples of how this can be used to make some really, really great sounding music, check out my friend Voltage Controller. I'll link his channel down below. It's great. He's done quite a few videos on the Heat+FX using it and playing, some really great kind of hip hop, trippy, ambient, all sorts of different music with this, and it sounds great. So if you want to hear some great examples of how this can be used, go ahead and check those out, and I'll be doing some videos like that coming up as well. So that's all I have on the Analog Heat+FX. Thanks for taking the time to hang out for a little bit, and hope to see you in the next video. In the meantime, take care of each other. Peace.